DM Dongo here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Advanced Arcana by Ken Carcass, Justin Johnson, and Luke Monroe. On sale for $12.95. Inserting Magic the Gathering's magic into D&D is no easy task, but these three are up for it. Right, so Advanced Arcana. What is this supplement? Well, it's 163 pages of an attempt to take the Magic the Gathering magic system and put it into the world of D&D. It's something that even the Wizards of the Coast guys didn't do when they developed the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. And Ravnica's been out for quite a while, so this thing's been in the works for quite a while, and I think it's done a very good job of it. It's a very complex system in order to try and marry the ideas of Magic the Gathering with the ideas of D&D and how magic works in that realm. So let's take a really shallow dive, because we're gonna go a little deep but not that deep on this system. Now, the world of Magic the Gathering is based around 5 colors: white, black, blue, red, and green. And broadly speaking, they kind of encompass all of the magic in Magic the Gathering, each color kind of representing a very narrow slice. So white is things like healing and protection. Black is your necromancy. It's kind of, that one's very obvious. So is white, to be fair. Red is things like direct damage, fire, and these all kind of have elemental affinities as well. Blue is things like illusions or abjuration magic, kind of like not protection so much, is more like counter spells. The classic blue decks are counterspell decks. And then green has to do with monsters, creations, or buffing your monsters up, making them stronger. Now, the way this works is in 3 steps: mana links, mana pools, and then spending that mana to cast spells. Now, character creation changes slightly for all casters as well, and I'll explain how the three other components work in conjunction with that. At character creation, for any caster, no matter which one it is, you choose 2 colors that you specialize in. Now, those 2 colors can be any color you like. However, it is worth noting that to look at the spell list that's provided in the supplement to figure out what kind of caster you want to be, as it were. You don't want to pick, for instance, something where you're not going to get the spells that you really want as a cleric. For instance, you probably might want to choose white, but you wouldn't necessarily want to choose as a wizard. You might want to choose white to heal, or you might, as a cleric, might not want to choose white. You might want to choose the other colors like necromancy, or maybe even some blue spells for like a counterspelling cleric, which might be kind of interesting. Now, if you are playing in the Ravnica setting, it's highly encouraged that you choose the 2 colors associated with your guild for the maximum role-playing and mechanical benefit, because the Ravnica guilds are kind of all based around the 2-color system as well. Now, the other thing that I will mention here is that it can make certain spellcasters feel like they lose part of their identity. For instance, clerics no longer are the sole proprietors of healing magic. Any wizard can be a white wizard, or a white-black wizard, for instance. They can take those colors that have those healing spells within them, and there's nothing to stop them from doing so. And all of this kind of stuff around, well, the colors determine which spells you get, kind of makes certain classes lose a bit of their identity. But I think there's probably enough within the classes in order for most of them to be okay. Now, there are some exceptions. The Divine Soul Sorcerer and the Celestial Warlock. Their primary change to them is that they gain access to the healing spell schools. So I think those 2 subclasses particularly lose a lot more than the others. Now, specifically how we look at how do we cast spells now. What does that mean? Well, firstly, cantrips use colorless mana, so they always can basically be used no matter what kind of mana links you have. Now let me explain mana links. Mana links is kind of like, I'm standing on a mountain. I want to link to this mountain. The mountain, it takes a bonus action to make a link, and the mountain gives me red mana. I can choose on my turn to use a free action to tap any number of mana I have a mana link to. And now once you've established a mana link, there's no cutting the link off. Unless, of course, your DM decides that if you're on another plane, you can't really draw mana from it, or make some other kind of thing that makes it so that you can't establish a mana link. So as you travel, you will be establishing new mana links and getting new types of mana. Now, once you have your mana, your spells require it in order to be able to be cast. So at the beginning of your turn, you go, okay, how much mana am I going to use? Well, you can tap any number of mana you have. However, your pool can only hold so much mana. 2 times your caster level plus your spellcasting ability modifier. So at level 1, you're with a 18 in whatever your main stat is, you're looking at 2 plus 4, so 6. So 6 mana I can absorb and hold in my mana pool, which is quite a lot if you think about it. Now, for each spell you cast, each spell will have a mana cost associated with a color or type of mana it needs. Now, there's a new spell as well that comes with this, because a Magic the Gathering is a lot about minion summoning, a lot about putting things in the way in front of you so that creatures and things can't get to you. And each of the colors has their own like a primary color. So when you choose your 2 colors, you have a primary and a secondary. So you might be a red wizard, but you've also got black as a secondary. And your primary color determines what kind of creatures you can summon. So if you're black, you're summoning things like undead. If you're green, you're summoning things like beasts and that kind of nature, those kind of nature, even up to like green dragon wyrmlings and triceratops and mammoths and those kinds of things. Red are more things like around goblins, gnolls, and that kind of stuff. White is stuff like angels or lower those kinds of things. Creatures that are more holy and good in general. So like unicorns are in that list as well. You can summon colorless if you wish to do so, but you can also summon things like, if you're blue, you're summoning things like winged creatures or water elementals or various snakes and things of that nature. So when you cast spells, every spell costs mana, like I said. So in addition to the spell slot you're using, you can use it to you use the mana you've already stored in order to cast a spell. And you can hold that mana in your mana pool for up to 10 rounds. Once the 10 rounds expires, then we get into something a little more dangerous. Things like mana burn. If you misjudge the amount of mana you can put into your mana pool, or you overfill it, then you can get mana burn, which causes damage to you and can do things like necrotic damage if you have too much black mana in there, or the damage types are very specific based on the color you have too much of. So it is worth noting you need to be very careful with this. The other thing you need to be aware of is that because you're looking at things like, well, how many spells am I going to cast a round? How many spells am I going to cast a turn as well? Because you might think, well, I only need to put in 2 mana because I'm only going to cast 1 first level spell, or I'm going to cast as a sorcerer, I might cast a 3rd level spell and a cantrip. So I might burn 6 mana and then the cantrip, but now I've got a reaction, so I've put 6 mana in because I want a counterspell. So you have to think a little farther ahead, and you may end up with mana at the end that's excess that you're just kind of holding, because just in case something happens that triggers your reaction. So like I said before, one of the things that I'm concerned about is the kind of not the balance of it, but the loss of identity for some classes, because of the loss of kind of like color systems and things of that nature. But I think on whole, it's probably okay. Now, moving on from the casting itself, you get some nice examples here. So example sections that tell you, here's what a typical battle might look like. Here's how I kind of envisioned it. Here's how it kind of works. So obviously every round you're tapping mana to kind of pull things in. It might start out at the beginning of the game, you don't have very many mana links. You haven't traveled very far. You've only been in the city, so you can only tap whatever is underneath you. Maybe the sewer has black mana, or maybe you're on a pirate adventure and you can only tap blue. It might be those kinds of things. So it's very setting dependent on what you have access to. But the example sections give a really good example of how this works. And they are a must-have and a great inclusion in this. Because the supplement is fundamentally changing the way Magic works for 5e, this is a really helpful way of understanding how the new system works. I always learn best by seeing other people play it, and this is a really great way of looking at that. Next, you look on to things like Desperation Casting, and I love this idea of pulling in more, of drawing in mana directly and casting spells that you wouldn't normally nor be able to. You see this thing like stuff in like anime and video games where people push past their limits and strike harder and pull in a reserve that they never thought they have. But it's like they're damaged by it. I'm thinking like My Hero Academia and Midoriya and him constantly breaking his arms and legs by using his abilities. That kind of thing. So there's a risk with casting those spells. Next, we move on to a section where you're suggesting props, which I really like the idea of. I like this kind of idea of I'm trying to help my players out. I'm trying to, as part of the guide here, because I'm changing so much, I want to make this system as easy to run as possible. And this bit here is a really good example of that. It adds in suggested props. It says, here are some ways you can make it easier to track this new resource you need to deal with. And one of the ways you do it is with the Magic the Gathering cards, and I usually have a ton of these, and I'll put some art up all over the place for this because the land cards tend to be some of my favorite art. They're really beautiful, and they tend to be very like they have this like look to them that makes them feel interesting. Now, in addition to that, you've got new magical items. Now, they really fit the theme of Ravnica beautifully and fill a really likely needed niche for generating mana quickly in light of the new system, or in interacting with the new mana system in unique ways, such as the Angel Feather, which allows hit points to be regained in the presence of white magic. And who doesn't want a Black Lotus? I particularly like the Guild Gates and Clue Stones. They're very interesting ideas. Basically, locations that are so powerful, they become magical items in their own right. And with abilities like these, they tend to be very fiercely protected by the guilds that own them. For example, transforming very hostile creatures into plants. Literal, like, potted plants, like, the one from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which fell from the sky. Maybe that's what happened to him. Anyways, after that, you get an inclusion of multiple adventures, and this is a really great boon for the supplement because it gives a nice way of showing how the balance might or might not be affected by the different magic system. Basically, I would run these as one-shots for my players and say, look, we're going to be playing with this new magic system. Let's try it out. Let's run these one-shots to see what kind of changes it implements. Do we like the system? Do we not like it? Do we want to try something else? Do we want to make adjustments and changes because it doesn't fit for our system? The two included adventures are quite simple, but they're interesting enough to be included in a Ravnica adventure and are really nice to have in an already very large supplement. They are really great if you want to try out using the new magic system as a one-shot, and I think that's the intention here. What did I like about Advanced Arcana? Well, I liked the supplement as a whole. It was really well done. Implementing the Magic the Gathering magic system was a monumental undertaking, and this is a really, really good job at it. Mostly because I don't think that it's possible to do a better job than it was done here. Because WotC never implemented it in their own Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, I think this is probably the closest we'll ever get, unless WotC changes their mind or anything else. I like the inclusion of the examples. They were a great idea, because otherwise I think some players would really struggle figuring out how this actually ends up playing out. I really like the idea of choosing colors. I like that kind of like customization. It feels more like you're choosing things at a more like higher level. You're getting a more focused caster in that way. Wizards tend to be very broad. Same thing with like a lot of sorcerers and warlocks. The clerics as well, they tend to be quite broad in their spectrums. They can do a lot of different things, whereas this laser focuses them down a narrow path, which I think will be good for some classes. Now, I also particularly like some of the new spells, and that's something that's included here as well. So there's about 60 of them. Some of my favorites include things like alternate reality, the ability to swap the AC of two creatures. It's a really amazing utility spell that could really help or hinder, but it's not too overpowered because you're swapping two specific creatures within a field. I also like the idea of allied invasion. +1 attack rolls to for however many allies are near you is a great spell. And you're seeing this a lot with the spells that are included that are new. You're seeing things like +X, where X equals, well, I'll spend some extra mana. And a lot of these spells have this similar flavor, and cards from Magic the Gathering. So I love the flavor text on all the spells. Every single spell has a little bit of flavor text to say, kind of like an interesting little anecdote. And a lot of the Magic Gathering cards have the same thing, which I think is kind of where you're trying to pair these things up. Positively and negatively, there's positively charged and negatively charged. There are two spells that are lined really great thematically. It allows you to kind of like punish players or characters or creatures that are opposite to you on the Magic the Gathering like wheel, as it were. So you go boom and you just knock you hit them hard enough, or if they're the same as you can help them, as it were. I really like the new magical items. I felt they fit the themes. There's a big set of them that all to do with the guilds and how they work. So I can see DMs giving these things out and going, so, well, you're part of this guild, you get these. You're part of that guild, so you get those, and you work together to kind of do something specific. I really love the fact that there's included adventures in this. There's a boon to the supplement, and it gives you a nice way of showing balance and things of that nature. And I really want to reiterate, I really love Desperation Casting. I love the idea of it. I love that kind of like high octane, high fantasy almost moments of desperation and power from a point of stress and risk. I love that kind of idea. It's a really, really great idea. And I really love the suggested props as well. It's really good to see that you're considering users and players in how the game is actually run. Now, what didn't I like about Advanced Arcana? Well, there's a couple of different things, and I just want to touch on them briefly because I love overall the whole supplement, but I want to touch on the things that I want to touch on. That's weird. I think that there could be some room for some omnicolor spells. I would love to see that. That's just a personal thing of mine. I used to play Magic the Gathering. I used to play omnicolor decks a lot because I used to love things like the gold and colored dragons and things like that were like, you had to have one of every mana in order to cast this spell. I think all of those decks were horrible. I think it never worked, but I kind of like the idea of it. The other thing I didn't like was I felt that having to be able to store mana in your pool for 10 rounds is quite a long time. I think you could encourage a very interesting kind of play if you drop that number down to 1, such that you had to retap your mana every time, and if you over or underused, you would end up with mana burn, or you wouldn't be able to cast your spells. I think it could be very interesting in cases where you're thinking about things like counterspell. So you have to prepare in order to be able to cast counterspell in the first place, but then you've got to be like, well, if nobody casts a spell or I don't get an opportunity attack, I'm in trouble. And I think that's kind of that's an interesting dynamic there, because some of the stuff around being able to summon these creatures makes you slightly stronger than you ordinarily would be. Another thing I didn't like that I will mention is I thought it might be nice to restrict certain classes to certain colors. It just might make it a little easier to retain those classes like personal identities. So restricting clerics, for instance, well, they're the only ones can take white. And if you take white, or if you're like the Divine Soul Sorcerer, or if you are the Celestial Warlock, you can take white. But otherwise, that's off limits to you. And clerics, conversely, can't take, say, red for whatever reason, because that contains a lot of spells like Fireball, Scorching Ray, lightning bolt, all of the really devastating spells. So I think that's kind of a weird thing for me, is that it feels like there's a loss of personal identity, or class identity, I guess is a better way of doing it, for those classes because of the kind of breakdown of their spell lists. But those are minor things, and I think the game would survive without that. Finally, the PDF itself. I would have loved to see some tabs and bookmarks just to make it easier to navigate. Things like chapter headings, you get them in some PDFs where it goes through on the side and says, well, chapter 1 contains this, chapter 2 contains this. It would make it easier to navigate, because I can see a lot of DMs who are trying to implement this. They're probably going to be referencing this thing a lot, so it would be helpful to have those things. Right, so my final thoughts on this. Overall, I really like this. This is a great PDF and a brilliant offering on it. If you really love Magic the Gathering, you love its magic system, you love everything about it, you want to inject more of that into your D&D game, and if you're playing a Ravnica setting, this is a really great offering. The included adventures are really nice to have, and the maps that come along with them and in separate files are really nice additions, and would be great to run as a tester of what the system can be like. My total score for this guy is 4 out of 5. I think there's still room for balance improvements here, and navigating this massive PDF without bookmarks can be a bit daunting, especially if it's going to be needed as a reference document for some time. In addition to that, I want to just say very quickly, this is probably one of the most ambitious projects I think I've ever seen on the DM's Guild in terms of the mechanical complexity being attempted. So every criticism I make is with a pinch of salt. I think a lot of DMs out there will find this incredibly helpful, will find it very useful, and they will very easily pick this up and quickly. The system isn't very complicated or complex or overly crunchy. It feels like it fits within the 5e system, which was an insanely complicated thing to do and work out. It doesn't feel like it invades the territory. The only criticisms I have are minor at best and our work around them. Thank you for listening to my rant and weird ravings, and please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and use my affiliate code if you decide to purchase Advanced Arcana. I'll have a link down in the doobly-doo below. Thank you, peace out.